Students experiencing homelessness are subjected to punitive discipline measures much more often than their housed peers. In fact, they are twice as likely to be expelled or suspended. Homeless students may be punished for behaviors that are directly related to their homelessness, such as falling asleep in classes, excessive absences, or dress code violations. Or they may be punished for behaviors that result from the instability, stress, and trauma of homelessness. Punitive discipline is associated with negative student outcomes, such as lower academic performance and higher rates of dropout. School resource officers, or SROs, are law enforcement officers assigned to schools to help maintain safety and discipline. They often interact with students around issues like attendance, discipline, and truancy, areas where students experiencing homelessness may struggle more than their peers. This makes it essential for SROs to be aware of the unique challenges faced by homeless students and the importance of trauma-informed restorative approaches in their interactions. In this video, Leslie, a McKinney-Vento liaison from Cherry Creek, Colorado, shares a powerful example of how understanding a student's situation can transform discipline into a moment of support. And Claire, a McKinney-Vento liaison from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, highlights the importance of restorative justice approaches which focus on healing and connection rather than punishment. She explains how SROs, when educated on homelessness, can be partners in creating a supportive school culture that addresses the root causes of student behavior, like trauma and instability. Their experiences underscore how schools can provide safe, supportive environments that recognize the impact of homelessness and offer alternatives to punitive measures.
We had a recent case where a student, his primary caregiver was recently incarcerated due to drug charges, and he had been squatting in an abandoned building, bouncing around between a lot of places. His family's mode of survival was selling drugs to get money and survive, get food. That's how they survive. So he was caught at school with a significant amount of drugs. And I was trying to explain to the SRO, this is this child's understanding of survival. His parent was just incarcerated, just moved in with his aunt, which was the most stable thing, but he had been at school for 2 weeks with us. And that was his first kind of interaction with our student services and things. And obviously it was not a positive one. And so we had this big conversation about how are we criminalizing kids when that's the only thing that they know and how they survive and what they were taught to do. How do we go back to understanding this kid has not had any consistency, has been at like 5 different schools in the past 2 years. He just needs some stability, and he just moved in with his aunt who's able to provide that, and then we're just going to take it all away. That feels so unjust, unfair. Not that there doesn't need to be some sort of follow-up potential consequence for doing that, right? We need to know that bringing that to school is not okay. And how are we supporting him and implementing more restorative practices? This kiddo needs that support, that love that he has not gotten because he hasn't had the stability and he's just constantly been in fight or flight. So having those conversations, which are like really hard, how do we meet in the middle to make sure at the end of the day, the 17-year-old is supported and loved and gets the care that he deserves and is able to finish out his education? Those are the hard conversations I think that we're starting to have when it comes to the intersection of juvenile justice and schools. And when something comes up in a school and you have an SRO there, what is their role in terms of their responsibility as a police officer, and what is our role as like student services and support and making sure the student is able to obtain their education? Like those sometimes come in conflict. Really laying on the line, here's what we can do and how we can meet in the middle.
We had an unaccompanied homeless youth that just has my heart. He's just such a great kid. His parents were deported, so he paid his own rent, he worked, he went to school, got amazing grades, ended up getting into the University of Denver pretty much on a full ride, and he's just a great human. But we had a lot of barriers that we had to overcome. One of the key people in the school that realized that there was something wrong to begin with was the SRO and 2 security staff. And that's when they came to me and they said, hey, we think he's living in his car. We don't know how to have a conversation with him so that it doesn't come out as accusatory, like you were saying, that it came from a more of a compassionate place. We had the conversations, started getting him some help and really working with him. And he actually thanked the SRO and the 2 security officers during a graduation speech. I bawled. I was just so proud of him, but he actually thanked them for recognizing that there was something and being a guide instead of, accusatory or looking down on him. They guided him. They actually ended up buying him his tuxedo for prom too, and going with him to get it fitted. It was the best thing ever. The guy that opens up the phone book and puts his finger down and he goes to meet them to hear their story. That's what my challenge was to one of the SROs that was new to a school that has a lot of McKinney kids. Put your finger down, find out their story, or say, let's go find out their story together. And then asking the questions and then checking back in. What questions do you have for me? How's everything going? That kind of thing.
It takes that time and effort and really trusting each other, which is the biggest thing. Learning together and growing together, in the language around barriers versus kind of the accusatory, going to the reflective. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing working with SROs, how we adjust our language and how we approach students too.
We've created a compassion piece around students facing some very unstable situations so that they're talking to them in a much lighter tone and using verbiage like they're not saying homeless, they're saying, unstable housing or facing some, food insecurity. We've seen a lot more referrals, not just for McKinney-Vento, but for kids that need help as a whole. One of the stories I have is from one of our just heavily impacted high schools. And one of the SROs was just out with his family and ran into a McKinney-Vento identified kiddo. And he said, hey, I've been worried about you. I haven't seen you at school. And instead of saying, where have you been? He said, are there any barriers that are coming up for you that we can help you with? Which I loved because he totally took that tool. And the kid said, yes, I keep having to change where I live. And he kept having to change the address, and that third-party car service wasn't changing it quick enough, so he kept missing schools. He said, well, let me call Leslie. And he did on a Saturday. He called me and said, hey, this is a barrier. And I was like, this is great. So actually using the verbiage, but also seeing that it wasn't that the kiddo was doing something wrong. There could have been a barrier, and he wanted to address that. And we did. It was amazing.
Probably the coolest things I participated in a while was our public library brought together we have community schools in Sun Prairie, which is an additional resource support, our police department, and some local housing resources. And we all came together at the table and talked about what's going on in our community, what's happening at the library, what's happening in the school system, what is PD seeing, and how are we working together to navigate some of these things, because we only have one family shelter in our county. We've had an extensive wait list. Our numbers have increased so much in our school district. We went from around 180 to 303. What's happening? How are we addressing this? What are we doing? So we came together and talked about, if we have this situation, where do we send them? And then we kind of went from there and started to make this flow chart of things. And it ended up being kind of like this beautiful process that brought our community together and made direct contacts and resources within our community. That was a really helpful thing, because we realized we're all seeing some of the same things, but addressing them in different environments. How do we navigate those things together? It helped kind of bridge a little bit too between PD and some of the organizations where there sometimes can be conflict or some negative experiences, trying to bring a more positive light to that. We have a community social worker who works for the PD now. So talking about how that role can evolve and be another additional support. That was kind of a huge jump for us, I think, in a positive direction of building those bridges between PD and our organizations and schools. As a school resource officer, you don't always have to be the enforcer. You can be a part of being the positive engagement and being on the preventative side and sharing supports and sharing in those happy moments, so it's not always so heavy and negative. I think just starting off the bat with, we are here to work together. We're not here to work against each other. You are now part of the student's education, which is a different role. You have to have a little bit of that mindset shift of you're here to support them in getting their education. You still have your PD lens, right? And that's important, but come alongside us and join us and we'll figure it out together from there.
As a McKinney-Vento liaison, we are taught to take every identification case by case. They're all different. They all have their own stories, to listen to those individual stories and to work together on that. One thing we've done is we've added a thing where if an SRO goes to search a kiddo, it'll actually tell them if they have that McKinney-Vento identifier. And they know at that point to stop and talk to us so that we can work on this kiddo together. But if you're brand new, it's recognizing where they are, and the education and the experiences that they have are so valid and everything. But to take each of the kiddos' cases case by case and to look at their situation as a whole and think outside the box on ways that we can serve the kiddo better.
Just come sit with us at a meeting and hear what we do and listen, because there's so much intersection with that. And I think they would learn so much just from sitting down with our team and all the different things that we talk about, from attendance to behavior to free and reduced lunch to all those things, how those all impact students. Ask questions. Don't be a stranger, right? Schools are very, very community focused, keeping that at the forefront of what we do.
By ensuring that SROs are educated on homelessness and the McKinney-Vento Act, schools can help reduce suspensions, expulsions, and other disciplinary actions that disproportionately affect students experiencing homelessness. Visit our resource linked in the description of this video on how positive school discipline practices can support students experiencing homelessness.